So if you were challenged to contact someone in your phone today to ask them to be the best man at your wedding, could you do it? How many people could you realistically contact today to go for a conversation about the meaningful stuff? If, like me, you find that challenge a bit difficult and makes you feel a bit awkward, you're not alone. We're going to talk today around male loneliness and how, as a 38-year-old heading for middle-aged, parent of 3 young boys, we can start to address that as a serious issue. Dads in Business is here to help busy working dads bring the best of themselves to work and to home. And a big part of that is to look after ourselves and address the reality in the room that we might not be in the same social circles that we once were. Male loneliness is a huge issue. 33% of fathers are without a close group of friends, and 23% of those who don't have at least one good pal. That's research taken out from Movember, and we're going to cite a lot of other research through our conversation today, because I'm delighted that my guest is a writer and comedian who has literally written the book about male loneliness, Max Dickins. Please do take some time to introduce yourself, Max, and tell us about how you ended up here, what you do for a living, and why the heck did you write a book about male loneliness?
Well, it's great to be here. And so I wrote this book. It's called Billy No Mates, How I Realised Men Have a Friendship Problem. And this book came out of a real experience I had, which is exactly as your introduction so brilliantly teed up. I was planning on proposing to my girlfriend, went as far as buying an engagement ring, go to the pub for a glass of wine. Having done that, and the couple of women I took with me for sort of moral support said, "So, who are you going to have as best man?" And I went blank, and I thought, "Oh, that's probably, the Pinot Grigio's done that, but there must be someone." So I get home that night. I'm like, right, get the paper out, pen, write a list of people. It takes me ages, and I think that's a bit odd. That's taken me so long. And then I look down the list, and I realise I work with a lot of these people. If I asked them, "Do you want to be my best man?" they'd be weirded out, but they'd be a bit uncomfortable about that idea. And some of the others I hadn't spoken to for 2-3 years, and I just thought, where have all my friends gone? So I Googled it, getting married, no best man. And there were millions and millions of results on Google, a lot of them on wedding website forums of grooms going, "Look, I've got this date in the diary, we're planning everything, and I've got no one to do that role. I feel terrible about it, but I don't know what to do." And they say, I've got a lot of the things you expect in a successful life. I've got a good job, got a lovely home, got a wife that I love, but I don't have these friends. So it's a problem. And like you said, there's lots of stats out there, and that male loneliness, if you want to use that word, I think maybe people relate to this idea of male friendship. Men have a friendship problem. And I wrote this book to solve my own, and also to work out, what does go wrong, what can guys do about it. And it's full of funny stories. It's from my point of view. It's like a memoir with loads of stats and research put into it to make it as robust as possible. But I think this is a subject a lot of people are affected by. The more we talk about it, the more it will become normal just to have these sorts of chats and then fix the challenge if you got one.
Yeah, it's one of the many things that I guess men don't speak about, isn't it? Is, I can't say that, or, "Oh no, it's not a problem for me, I'll be all right, and I like my own company anyway." How did you feel when you were writing the book? Did you did you mentally expose a lot of risk, did you feel, around it, opening it up as a topic?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, it's pretty embarrassing to kind of say, I haven't really got any mates. And I also thought, if I don't solve this problem, I just imagine my wedding day and my family being there and looking at me and going, he hasn't got anyone with him. And that is kind of a shaming thing. And so it was quite exposing. What was also exposing was really why I think this issue is interesting for men, is that it's kind of a doorway into a much bigger conversation, which is, as men, how do we have relationships? How do we have friendships? What's our relationship with ourselves? If we can't, for example, talk about gritty, more emotional stuff. Why is that? And so it kind of makes you look at yourself a lot. It made me look at a lot of myself and question about a few things. And so yeah, it was hard, but hopefully what came out of it was a lot of truth. And I certainly, you know, without doing too many spoilers, it certainly helped me to confront a few things and overcome that problem.
Yeah, and I wonder, Max, just before the book was published and before you got the great sort of headwind that you got with it, very much like when I launched the Dads in Business project for what it is, I started just writing articles and blogs about my experiences because I don't think dads got the same support as what moms did in the workplace. I very much thought it's just me. Did you have that sense of this around this topic as well? It's only me that's got this problem, only to find that that's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I looked into the research, because I thought I wanted, is it just me or is it other people? And I saw there's such a big body of research. So this goes back to when they started measuring social networks, friendships, however you want to term that. Goes all the way back to the early 70s. Men had fewer friends than women in all these surveys and all this research, especially fewer close friends. And I just thought, this is such a big thing. This should be something that everyone knows about, but it's not. And when I would go and talk to people about it, women would say, yeah, do you know what? My husband's like that, or my dad is like that, or my brother's like that. But when I spoke to blokes, they'd be a bit kind of, you know, coy and weird about it because they didn't really necessarily want to confront it or talk about it or own up to it. But you're right, it's something that was a common experience for lots of people, but one that wasn't getting the airtime necessarily that it needed.
So kudos to you for bringing it up and making it so apparent. Yeah, obviously it's very evident that it's not just you, and I think that the book is certainly helping that. We're going to talk about a few specific topics around men's mental health in a broader sense. We're going to touch on banter and masking and how we can start to find friends in our middle ages when our lives have changed. I just wonder, before we dive into that, Max, did you notice, or what are your experiences around COVID and how that impacted men and their relationships with their social circle? What have you experienced in that space, and what lessons are you learning as we continue?
So COVID was a really interesting one because I think it made men confront a lot of things. One was when they're kind of pulled out of their work social circle, what's left? The answer is often not very much. They were also, I think, a lot of men told me they suddenly started having a pretty tough time, as lots of people did during COVID, and wanting more support and realizing they didn't have those avenues. And I think more broadly, it allowed us to slightly cull the friends in our social group that weren't really doing much for us, and maybe vice versa. And it got us into some bad habits, I think, as well, that still a lot of people are trying to get themselves out of, I've noticed, socially. So COVID was kind of an interesting one. It was one of those moments, I think, in life that are quite rare when you audit your social life and you're confronted with it. Now, this often happens for people in moments like weddings. Like, you've got to make a wedding list. You've literally got to rate a list and put them on tables, like, and you put the people who are closest to you, literally sat closest to you in the room, right? So that's quite a rare thing. But also in the pinch points of your life. So it might be you lose your job, you get bereaved, you get divorced, right? These kind of pinch points, the dips, that's when you're often confronted with your social group and the nature of it. When things are going well and when you're busy, you can kind of rumble along through it and it's kind of fine. But it's those moments, the harder moments, when you're confronted with it. And I think COVID was that for a lot of guys. And so it was interesting.
It was. And I think some of my, you say about bad habits, and I'm going to sort of try and ask you to unpack that a little bit about what you mean by bad habits that we picked up. One I think I picked up is I defer to my phone for my friends. And by that, I mean, I'm basically friends with WhatsApp chat groups because my social life is quite limited. My wife would disagree, but I don't engage anywhere near as much outside of my professional setting with my friends other than in WhatsApp. Is that what you recognize as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I call it the WhatsApp trap. So what happened is with COVID is I think friendship has a rhythm. So the rhythm is I organize something, you show up, we do something together. The next time you organize it, or you do something as a group. And out of that, someone goes, "Oh, I'm having a birthday next week. Do you want to come down?" Like there's that rhythm. You fall out of the rhythm, it's suddenly a lot harder to get back into it. And that's what happened. We also realized we could sit on our ass, watch Netflix and do bugger all. And so suddenly leaving the house or going to see friends, it became, it's a bit of effort. It's maybe a bit inconvenient. And I think we get stuck in this WhatsApp trap. I can certainly relate to that. And I think we have to be very careful that technology doesn't pull us out of our real relationships, because I can bore you with a lot of the research, but in terms of our impact on our well-being, face-to-face time is a lot more valuable than digitally kind of mediated.
Yeah, because you're right. It's so much easier to, I don't know, watch the football on Sunday afternoon on your sofa with a beer in your hand, and it's as if you're watching it with your mates anyway, because you're all in the WhatsApp chat saying, "Oh, I can't believe he's just done that." Mine's on a delay, so I know what's going on before it's even happened anyway. And it's
yeah. Maybe an analogy is I think WhatsApp is a bit like you kind of get a load of like candy sweets. So you can have a night doing, messaging 15 different people, gifts and jokes and quick catch up, and you feel there's like a sugar rush. But then then you have a real quick come back down to earth. Whereas face-to-face interaction, you might get kind of less of a rush, but it's a much richer meal and it lasts a lot longer. And I think it's important that we don't cut that out to kind of do the easy option, which is the WhatsApp. Now, don't get me wrong, WhatsApp can be really useful for socializing, but it should, what someone told me was, an academic told me, is that it should be a bridge into real life connection. It shouldn't just be like a destination. I think it's very easy for it to become that, and it's better than nothing. But what often happens is better than nothing's often eventually we start seeing as better because it's easier, and then over the long run, we then it all comes home to roost.
And it becomes the only. Never mind the better; it's the only. Yeah, because it's so easy. You're right in what people share on WhatsApp is all those GIFs and memes and everything that does the rounds. It's like, who can be funnier? Who can do this? Who can do that? Who can tell the rudest joke or tell the nastiest thing? And it kind of segues quite nicely into one of the topics I wanted to cover. And it's something, Max, that I think is a real highlight in your book. And it's talking about banter as an issue, I guess, as something that we need to overcome or address. Would you mind giving us a bit of a background in what you think banter is? What are its problems or how it's evolved? And how you think we could start to address it as a real issue so we don't just go back to being manly men?
Yeah, so banter's a really interesting subject because it's become to mean lots of different things. So what I understand is banter, and what I think a lot of blokes would is just that male way of relating to one another. I've often described it as the jazz of casual brutality. I kind of take the mick out of you, you take the mick out of me. We're going at each other, but there's a complicity, right? There's kind of a nudge and a wink, right? There's a bit of fun. And it can be one of the best things about being with a group of guys or being with your male friends is that dynamic, that vibe. It can be itself like its own intimacy. It can be great fun and something that's just for you. And you know it's just for you because someone else who's not in the group comes over, takes the piss out of your mate. Everyone's like, hang on, mate. We take the piss out of him. You can't. We don't know who you are. Right. So it can be great. But I think what happens is when that kind of way of relating becomes our only way of communicating with one another, our only tool, it becomes a bit of a crutch. And what it can do, if used wrong, is really change the permissions between everyone in the group, right? And permissions is important because if you kind of venture towards saying something maybe a little bit vulnerable, and I go, "Oh bloody hell, mate! God, you're not going to bore us with this, are you?" Right, or something like that. You know, as I'm just kind of taking the mick. You might be like, "Oh no, I won't actually." But then it's not just you feel chastised; the group feels, "Oh, here, that's not the sort of thing we talk about. It's not the sort of thing we do," and it often happens subtly. It's not like a deliberate, "I'm being a complete, dick." It's just much more kind of piecemeal and subtle. Gradually, the vibe is, the unspoken rules are, it's a load of stuff we don't talk about. There's a load of clothes we might not wear. There's a load of drinks we might not order, right? Because we're gonna cop some. So that's, I think, really important when you think about what we can get from our friendships. And so, without being pretentious, he said, about to be pretentious. So Aristotle, who's like ancient Greek philosopher, he's kind of the original dude about friendship. He wrote loads about it, and a lot of what people talk about now with friendship actually goes back to things he said. He said one of the roles of a good friend is it's like a mirror. So it kind of reflects you back to yourself, and you get to know yourself. And a great friend will get to know, you'll get to know the best parts of you, and you'll feel bigger, and you'll feel prouder, and you'll feel like you're almost curating the best version of yourself. But a less good friend will highlight the bits that maybe aren't the best parts of you, and then the opposite happens. My worry with this mirror analogy is we can only reflect back things that we allow ourselves to reflect back.
That we throw out.
Well, if I don't reflect back your emotional self to you and only reinforce the funny bits you do, then you don't grow into that version of yourself. And I think there's these subtle ways we relate to one another really do affect not only what's possible to talk about, but who we become. So it can feel like the banter thing can feel like, oh, it's just a joke, mate. Let's not make it too serious. And I get that, but I think it's kind of totemic, the banter subject for male friendships.
So you're not saying banter is necessarily a bad thing. It is, there is value to it. It's just don't make your whole community based around that.
It's like, it's to do with context. It's to do with how many tools have you got in your toolbox? So, I mean, one of the biggest things for me was about expanding my toolbox. So sometimes, basically, the only way I could connect to people was by trying to be funny, right? And I was the funny one, right? My whole life I've been the funny one, right? And I don't dislike that part of myself. It can be fun, but it also meant that people would never tell me the sort of things that would allow us to get to know one another really personally. And it would also mean that I never got round to doing that myself. I just realised the lights have gone out.
It's gone very dark for you, man.
Hang on, let me just turn the lights back on.
I hope that's not setting the mood for the rest of the conversation there, Max.
Yeah, no, it's quite dramatic though, isn't it? That's sort of wet.
Yeah,
sorry about that.
There you are. So, so with you were always the funny one. It's interesting. Did you feel then, as you were growing older, that you had to show up as that person all the time? It was almost your character.
I think it was both my character, but also it was a performance. The thing is about friendship groups and even friendship pairs is we all have our own role in them. And we know this is true because I bet if you're watching this, you're not the same with every person in your life. We kind of code switch between different versions of ourselves. In the same way that me doing this with you now, I'm being slightly more presentery Max than, if I bumped into you in the pub, Rob, we'd have much more of it'd just be more informal. I'd be a different version of myself. But the same with different friends. Some you are the confident one. Some you're the quiet, contemplative one. We are different versions of ourselves with different people, but we can settle into that performance. And I think often you see with blokes, there's the funny one in there, and they kind of get lost in it, and it becomes this moat around them. And if you're not that one, there's parts of you maybe that you use humor as a deflection, or even unconsciously or without meaning to. By overdoing it, you're not creating that space where people want to contribute certain sides of themselves.
And I think what you say there is going to lead into the sort of the second key point I wanted to talk about, which is masking. But I think just before we jump into that one, do you think an over bantered friendship community can lead to that community distancing itself and therefore amplifying the loneliness problem? Because all we ever do is banter, and I just can't be bothered with it. I'm going to disengage from the group a little bit.
Yeah, there's two ways it can make people lonely. One is, like you say, they disengage because they're not getting enough out of it. And I think as you get a bit older, you know, life is brilliant and hilarious a lot of the time. Sometimes life isn't hilarious. So if someone's only trying to make everything a joke, you just think this isn't real. This is just, it's boring. It's not real. So you might disengage from the group, and then you get disconnected from them. Maybe you have less friends, you feel lonely. But the more kind of obvious way it makes you lonely is there's whole parts of your inner life that are not expressed. And that is a lonely feeling. It's a feeling that no one else is like me, or no one else knows what I'm experiencing. That is lonely. And if you can't express those bits because of the culture of the group, then obviously there's going to be loneliness. And that's what often, when I went and visited men's groups, they'd often go to these men's groups, guys, because they'd find in their social circle, it'd all be about going on the piss or having a laugh. And it wasn't necessarily, you know, they enjoyed going out with the guys, but they did need this other avenue to kind of talk about stuff. And they realized when other guys in the group would share stuff, they go like, oh yeah, me too. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, and it's what we'll touch on that as well later on in the conversation about how we can try and find those new communities that do speak about that. Because often in my introductions about what dads in business do is it's like, well, if I was struggling, if you go to a business event, you always have to say work's great, work's brilliant. It's always busy. It can't not be busy. You can't be struggling. You go and talk to your mates in the pub. It's how's football? You know, the match was good, or you know, we're having 8 pints or 10 tonight. Which one is it? You go back home, how's work? Things are good, things are great, because you can't necessarily speak about that openly at home. So that loneliness thing becomes internalized because I can't say that. I can't show weakness. I can't show I'm stressed. And I have this role to play in everyone. So it's really interesting listening to how that manifests in that banter space, if you like. And I guess does go on to the second part that I wanted to mention around masking. It's a word that I hear quite often, and others probably watching and listening this do. Could you give us your definition of what it is? Because sometimes I think it can get over-analyzed. But what is it? Tell us about it.
So, I mean, mask is often something that comes up a lot when people talk about masculinity. It can become sort of therapy speak and Instagram bullshit, the way people use it all the time. So a mask is a very simple idea that you have a kind of a front stage self and a backstage self. So it's a theatre analogy. When you're up in front of an audience, you're a kind of a persona. And when you are away from the audience, is a different version of you, right? So we have different versions. And the idea of masks with men is that we might show up with our male friends with a certain mask on that hides part of ourselves. So hides the part of ourselves that's actually really anxious about something at the moment, or is really sad about something that's happening in their marriage, or has been dishonest about how good work is at the moment. Now, sometimes masks can be good, right? Because if you show up to a child's birthday and you're feeling terrible, you know, you should probably have a mask on and going like, hey, what a great day, okay? What allows us to be sociable. But the trouble is if you always have this mask on with people, they can't get close to you. And like one of the biggest tools of connection is, and this isn't, you know, breaking news, is vulnerability, sincerity. So sincerity is like a Latin word, it means sin, sin without without wax. So when they used to make Romans used to make jewelry, they'd have like imperfections in the metal, so they'd cover it in wax. Okay,
Oh.
so imagine if you showed those imperfections, right? That's what being sincere is. That's kind of authenticity, if you like. And so that's what people who talk about masculinity mean about masks. So I think it's a useful reflection if you're watching this to go, do you wear a mask? Do you wear multiple masks in different contexts? What is it hiding? Is it doing a job for you that is healthy or unhealthy? And here's a classic one, is I think with men and friendship, is the mask we wear is we're kind of unaffected by the other guys or by our mate. And like, we're not needy. We don't need them to like us or want to be with us. So they blow us out last minute, they flake. That's all right. No worries, man. But we might actually be like, oh, that's quite hurtful. I've taken that personally. That's upset me. Right? That's an honest reaction.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, telling your mates, do you know what? You're definitely this friendship means a lot to me. You are one of my best mates, and I'm really glad we're hanging out tonight. Right? That's an authentic response. But we might be like, oh, buddy, here you're going to bore me again, are you? All right. Yeah. I better drink to get through this, wink, you know, or a version of that.
Yeah.
So I think I'm glad, like Rob, you're slightly challenging some of these things as well, because I don't want this to feel like I'm telling blokes to reinvent themselves, or that sometimes banter, sometimes a mask, sometimes being authentic, or just talking about banal, nothing stuff can't be great and really important as well. But it's just about having all these options on the table and feeling like when you are connecting, it's two real people being together, not two versions of people just missing.
I think there's a lot around this. What I'm getting and listening to you is it's about awareness and awareness of, am I okay with banter? Because I have a laugh with my mates on a WhatsApp chat. Of course I do. But then there's times where it does not overstep the mark, but sometimes it gets relentless. And I have to become aware of that and not just continue to put fuel on the fire. I need to make the change happen if I want change to happen, if you like. And definitely the masking thing. I mean, there is a lot of buzzwords going around. And I think in terms of the banter and the masking piece, I just want to sort of segue a little bit into how we can get blokes engaged in well-being and mental health conversations without realizing they are. Because you mentioned there, vulnerability. I'm seeing that bandied around everywhere. It's like the hot thing to be is vulnerable. Authenticity is another one. Everyone's desperate to say how authentic they're being, but should you really have to say you've been authentic if you've been authentic? It's one of my little bugbears on social media that everyone seems to be vulnerable and authentic.
And also sometimes you shouldn't be authentic.
Oh, go on.
Well, you shouldn't be. Like, if you're in a foul mood, being authentic would be snapping at me, or burning my ear off, moaning about your journey on the way in. You're being boring and selfish. Be inauthentic, right? We can't. We should be inauthentic. That's what being sociable is. Yes. Sometimes you should be inauthentic. Now, sometimes that is an unhealthy behavior, but sometimes it's just part of what being, for example, in a public space is. Like, it's just, we can just go to these buzzwords and use them as excuses for bad behavior.
And this is the thing. It's becoming a thing where everyone's vulnerable, everyone's authentic. So therefore, those who are considering how they can observe their own mental fitness, their own mental health, their own mental well-being, it just looks like, to be blunt, often it looks like a lot of waffle. And I'm better off not engaging with it. So I'll step back and go back to my banter circle. So what would you say, or how would you encourage, or what do you see to get men who aren't used to the buzzwords of well-being, to get them in to talk about their mental health?
I think being as practical as possible, using metaphors that men can relate to, not going to language which is on the one hand vague, but on the other hand subtly insulting. So like when you go like, we don't want to do any toxically masculine behaviors here, right? I think a lot of men go like, not for me.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, toxic masculinity.
Yeah, it's about that. That's why I think the friendship thing is masculinity and all that stuff was a conversation, a thing. I just thought it's for other people. That it's for like proper awful people like Harvey Weinstein, people like that. It's not for me. I'm just a bloke. I'm fine. Yeah. And also, on the other hand, it's for all this sort of very kind of new age waffly stuff that I don't really get, and it sounds like bollocks. So I kind of left it over there. But then when I looked at it through the frame of relationships and like how I was with my girlfriend or how I was with my mates, I was like, oh, on a practical everyday level, I kind of get it. In a nutshell, when people talk about masculinity, what they mean is there are certain things about being a bloke, which is a performance, right? We choose to be it. We have some rules that we've inherited that we live by. Now, some of these rules are useful. Some of them are a bit unhealthy, right? So I think when you start being practical with it and put it through a lens of the everyday, blokes are like, oh, I get it. I get it.
So for me, I think, because I have this discussion a lot locally, especially pre-COVID, when we were having a lot of dads in business physical meetups. We basically get together and just chat. Now, if I badge that up, and even my own experiences, if I wanted, going back to before I was a dad, my wife was pregnant, and I always bring this up when I'm speaking to people about the purpose of dads in business. I went to an antenatal class, the sessions you go to help you plan becoming a parent. And they tried to show me how to breastfeed. And I always remember it as the most stupid thing I've ever witnessed and sat through. It was supposed to be a 2-day event. We didn't go back for the second day. But I remember leaving thinking, what on earth am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to check in to see if I'm all right? What can I do? Because I'm going to go to a pub and talk about the footy, because that's what we do with my mates. I had my kids, not young, but one of the younger ones, or the first out of my social circle to have it. So there's no one to talk to around it about what on earth am I going to do? And I really struggled with that. And I thought, I'm not going to engage in a well-being thing because they'll think I need mental health intervention. And absolutely, if you need it, go and find it. But I wasn't there. I was just here. I just needed someone to talk to. And if someone badged that up as a well-being event, I wouldn't go.
Yeah.
But if they went saying, there's a group of blokes coming and we're going to have Nando's for dinner, do you want to come and have some? Yes.
So, I mean, I think the kind of branding of it and how you make this relatable is really important. I went and spent a day with an organization called Dad La Soul, which is like a play on De La Soul. And they created it for similar reasons. Like a lot of blokes were saying that in these antenatal classes, they felt completely left out. There's not any resources really for dads. Like for little things like, where do you go and change your child? If you've got your kid out, you can't go in the ladies' loos where the changing facilities are. It's like, where do you get, like all these things that you wouldn't think of. So it's kind of, they thought, well, we need a sort of support group, but also to get together and form friendships. But we don't want it to be boring. We don't want it to be kind of labeled as something that sounds really worthy and kind of intense. So it was like that. You go to Dad La Soul, there's like decks. They take it in turns to DJ. The kids are there doing soft play. The dads are there. Then once a week, they kind of do a dads only kind of men's group thing, few beers, pool, some games. And that works. And the most successful intervention in male loneliness worldwide is men's sheds. And this started because about 20 or 30 years ago in Australia, the local government were putting on events to try and get old people, lonely old people, to come out and be around people. And they put on coffee mornings and no blokes would show up, right? And they go, what are we going to do? The bloody blokes won't come. So Dick McGowan in Australia goes, I tell you why they won't come. They don't want to go to a coffee morning, mate. So what you need is a shed. So they started doing these things called men's sheds, where you could bring stuff to make or fix, and it'd be full of tools and there'd be cups of tea. You didn't have to make stuff if you didn't want to, but blokes would show up, and it's really successful. This model's gone around the world. I went to one in London, a men's shed, mixture of ages. Women aren't, by the way, banned. Some women come, not so many, but it's not about just being blokes, but it's a fact that blokes can bond around an activity. So it's about but it's not called a mental health weekend or something like that. The only thing on the ticket is the shed. Now, this kind of connects also to something I think is important, which is that male friendships are different to female friendships. And this kind of stuff has been discovered by all sorts of researchers. Kind of the most notable one is a guy called Dr. Robin Dunbar. He's a famous evolutionary anthropologist. He's regarded as like the Don of friendship research. He's been doing it his whole career. And here's the difference between male and female friendships, because men have a very distinct social style. You need to think about that if you want to kind of get men socializing, or if you want to kind of get your own social life in gear. So whereas female friendships tend to happen face to face, be based around talk, a lot of emotional disclosure, women will often be able to name a best friend, one best friend. Men's friendships tend to happen side by side, based around sharing activities. There's not a lot of talk, often in groups. When men are asked to name a best friend, they won't name one person. They'll go, well, it's sort of Clive, Dave, Danny, and John. It's like a kind of a team of people. It's like modeled on the club, right? It's the fact that the club is what keeps people together. Whereas for women, it's much more of a personal relationship. Now, if you understand that, you can understand how, when you get a bit older, those sort of spaces, those sort of activities, especially you become a dad, you get super busy, they can drop off the radar a bit. So if you want to get your friendships back on track, or if you want to provide help for blokes, you maybe want to reflect on those distinct things and go, how can we make those things again in our own lives?
And these sort of solutions, interventions are all great, but someone seeing that for the first time might go, I'm not lonely. I'm perfectly fine. Got loads of friends. How can we identify if we are actually lonely? What are the telltale signs?
Well, I suppose the telltale signs are simply how you feel. So sometimes people get very pissed off with me and they go, oh, why you keep on telling blokes they're going to need loads of friends? I haven't got many friends. I'm very happy. Thank you very much. And that's fair enough. Loneliness is a subjective feeling. Okay. It's not an objective fact. It's just reflecting on like, how are you? Are you happy with your social circle? Do you feel you're getting what you need? Then that's great. But if you're not, or if you think you may be dissembling or slightly lying to yourself, then there are things you can do. There's not a right number of friends, and it's different for introverts and extroverts. Extroverts will need a few more, introverts a few less. Different people like more solitude, others like less. It's kind of up to you, but it's entirely about how it's making you feel, and there's no real kind of objective way of judging it. So if you see a mate who
the light's gone off again there, Max.
I know, yeah. It's like this is a useless room, isn't it?
For those that are listening, the light in the room where Max is has just gone off again.
Yeah, sorry about this.
That's all right.
It's like the light bulbs are deciding I'm not being interesting enough, and they've kind of died.
Dropping you a hint there, Max. Huh?
but anyway, it's hard to judge if people are lonely from the outside, because spending time by yourself does not mean you're lonely.
Yeah, because I quite like my own company. I genuinely do. I don't have a massive social circle, but I got a few friends, I guess. Am I lonely? I don't know. I guess it ties back to probably the last thing I want to talk about around friends in the professional setting. So I work for myself. I have a business partner in a couple of projects. I spend probably more time with them than I do at home. But we also get on. I love my work. I really enjoy my work. And therefore, I enjoy spending time with the people I work with. I don't know if you're going to disagree with me, but I would class them as friends. Can you have proper friends at work? And I saw you posted an article on this on social media. I just wanted to try and touch around the theme of that, because I'll probably share it in the show notes. What's the sort of exec summary of that.
Yeah, I mean, so the hardest thing when you talk about friendship is to even define what you mean by friend, because people have different definitions.
Yeah.
So maybe this will help. So Aristotle, going back to that guy again, apologies. He basically said there are three sorts of friend. There's friends that you hang out with because you find their company pleasurable, and vice versa. There's friends you hang out with because you're useful to one another, right? Like maybe you play tennis together or you work together. And there's a third sort of friendship where it transcends those two things. You might be useful to one another, maybe. You might enjoy each other's company, maybe. But you're friends way beyond that. You'd be friends if those two things weren't happening at that time. You're bonding on something that transcends those things, whether he called it character or something about that person. Now, I think we can kind of reflect on that. There are different categories, and this third one is where our best friends are. Now, often I think friendships at work, they're kind of in that second category. We're friends because we are useful to one another. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't be valuable. It doesn't mean that they're exploitative. But you often find with professional friendships that when you stop being useful to one another, so you stop being clients, you stop being colleagues, you don't really hang out anymore. And so you haven't reached that third category yet. It doesn't mean they can't be a bridge to that third category, but I think there are some reasons why it's quite hard to get there. Because, for example, in a client supplier relationship, you know, there can't be full authenticity, really,
because there's a transaction happening. I guess
it's transactional, and you know, you can't. For example, if I'm a supplier and you're my customer and I'm having a tough time at work, or I'm thinking, do you know what, I'm going to sack off this company and do something else. This is boring. you can't say that, because they might be like, hang on a minute, you're literally selling me stuff, and kind of vice versa. So they can be tricky, but I think a good metaphor is, this is not my metaphor, it comes from an academic called Jeffrey Hall. He calls it the social biome. So in your gut, you've got a biome of different microbes, and you kind of need a big balance of them. They all do a slightly different job. And I think our social world works a bit like that. We don't only need super close friends. We also need a bit of everything. Friendship is a bit like a system, right? We need different sort of friends for different sorts of jobs at different sorts of times. And sometimes even the kind of more superficial friendships, they're all part of the mix. Like, you know, today I'm going to leave this conversation and I'm going to walk out that door and I'm going to be feeling a lot better for having spoken to you. Now, we wouldn't say we are friends in this moment, right? We're being friendly to one another, but it doesn't mean it's not a very valuable conversation. So much of our life and our social life is this mix. And I think work friendships are a big part of the mix. But then the reflection back to people listening to this is to go, do you also have 3 or 4 maybe friends which are enduring, which are close, which are roots to talk about things you can't talk with them, or compartmentalized friendships you've got? And that's a big thing for blokes. A lot of our friendships are compartmentalized.
It's functional almost. Yeah,
they're functional. Yeah,
that's a very good distinction. I like the sort of the challenge or the reflection to say and identify that they're not bad. Work friends are good, but do you have friends in the other buckets too? I think the blend is a good challenge to go and look at. I was going to ask you, Max, just before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Blokes in the middle age, heading to, I'm not there yet, heading to 38. I am not middle aged. Heading towards it, or going through it. And they might have listened to this and thought, you know what? I don't have a great mix of friends. I am a bit lonely. What can I do? Is there some quick tips to start? I don't ask you to solutionize everything here, but where can a bloke start if they are feeling a bit lonely?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm very keen to give tips, because I think it's important, and people want some tactics. So the first thing, this is going to sound super obvious, is show up. Now, this, you might go like, this is all too simple to be useful. But how many times have you been invited to something and flaked, or gone, the trains are a bit dodgy, though, aren't they? Oh no, the finale of Succession's that night. I'm going to watch it with the missus. There's always a reason not to go, And this is what I was always do. I blow people out. If you blow people out enough, you stop being invited. So show up to stuff. And when you show up, it gets its own momentum, right? You then start being invited to other things. So that's a real simple thing in your control, is to show up more. Another thing is to go first. So I asked my friend, Steve, I said, yeah, he's got loads of friends. I said, what's your secret, mate? He said, well, my friends call me the Sherpa because I organize everything. But if I didn't organize everything, we never see each other. And for me, that's a great tip. Be the Sherpa. Be the one who shows a bit of leadership, who goes first, sends that text, goes, yeah, fancy a pint next Wednesday, who gets people together. We're having a golf day, June the 3rd, whatever it is. Be the one who brings people together. Now, that can sometimes feel like a lot of effort, but socializing is contingent on leadership. Can you go first? Can you be the Sherpa? Two other ones I might kind of share with you. One is set yourself up for consistency. So it's not enough to kind of see someone once every 4 or 5 months, really. What we want to do is to make our social diary busy proof. So can you put in some sort of regular rituals, gatherings? Like for me, I play five-a-side football every fortnight with roughly a similar group of blokes. Sometimes different people come. We'll go to the pub afterwards. We might go and do the pub quiz after that. But I know that's in there. So if I get super busy and I lose kind of headspace with friendships and I drop the ball, I know I've got that to come back to.
That's ring fenced, if you like.
Yeah. And it means you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And even if everyone doesn't manage to get to every single one, it means you are front of mind. You are kind of always staying present with the idea of getting together. So I think that's a big one. And then finally, I would say, help yourself be lucky. Now, we like to think when making friends is like some sort of amazing miracle where we meet someone and we've got the same sense of humor and we grew up in the same place. It's like this syncing of souls, right? It's like, oh, I can't believe it. You're so unique. I'm so unique. Wow. It's not like that. The truth is, the research shows, the psychologists call it propinquity, right? Complex word, simple thing. You end up being friends with people who are near you a lot and who you have enough in common with, right? Robin Dunbar calls it 7 pillars of friendship. Basically, you have some basic things in common and you're just near each other quite regularly.
Yeah.
That's why if you go to uni, so easy to make friends, repeatedly bumping into the same people, fairly similar in mindset, in outlook, you become friends. It's why school, you meet tons of friends. It's why you're in flat shares in your 20s, tons of friends. We leave that, it gets harder. But so then how do you recreate that? Rather than going like, oh God, I need some friends, you ask yourself, what do I like doing? What am I interested in? What have I been meaning to try out and haven't got round to? Where are people gathering to do these things, to talk about these things, to try these things? You show up there and commit to showing up enough times. Just by being around them, you start making friends. Here's an example. I've got a CrossFit gym near me that I go to, been going to about a year. Now, I'm not the CrossFit kind of cliche, which is kind of these kind of mutant fitness people. But I started going and met some people and I was kind of added into a WhatsApp group. The gym is called Motion and we've got a spin-off WhatsApp group called Slow Motion, just for people who like guys who hate the gym. But now we go out about once a month, have a curry, go to the pub, have a couple of drinks. We got together, watched the rugby when the Six Nations was on. But that came out of me going, I'm going to get a bit fitter. It didn't come out of me going like, I'm going to go and get loads of friends. So these are things we can control, and we do have more control than we like to think we have. If you're listening to this and you're going, look, I'm a bloke with young kids, it is harder when you have less time. Of course it is. But then often you'll reflect, but I've got enough time to bang through 2 different box sets a month on Netflix. So we do have some time. And I'm reflecting myself on this, but I'm not always perfect either. But we need to kind of take some agency and some responsibility, realizing there's a bit more to do than we often give ourselves credit for.
I think that goes back to your point 1 and point 2. Show up and go first.
Yeah.
Decide. Now you're aware of what to do. It's on you to go and do something about it.
Yeah.
get off of. Oh, I am watching Succession, so don't spoil the ending for me.
I won't. That's I would say it's worth. The finale is worth blowing out a friend for, maybe.
So I hear, and I'm trying. As soon as it all mentions it, I'm turning it straight off. I'm hoping it's almost like a mix between Mad Men and Sopranos. And if it's as good, if it's anywhere near as good as Sopranos finish, I'll be a happy man. But I'm not there yet, so don't ruin it for me.
I won't.
Max, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, sir. Tell us again about the book and how we can find out about the work that you do, and where we can connect.
Yeah, sure. So the book is called Billy No Mates. It's out in all good bookshops. The paperback is out July the 3rd. It's out in hardback, ebook, audiobook. I read the audiobook as well, so you get my dulcet tones. It's full of jokes. Don't worry. It's not a load of worthy stuff. It's a good rollicking read, lots of jokes. My name is Max Dickins. MaxDickins.com is my website. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, all the usual places. Come and say hello. I love hearing stories. If you get the book and you enjoy it, let me know. If you don't enjoy it, keep it to yourself. I really appreciate the opportunity of talking to your folks today, Rob.
Nice one. Thank you, Max. I can vouch for the audiobook as well, because you are currently putting your dulcet tones into my ears as I walk to work. So it's a great listen. I do recommend it to everyone out there. And Max, once again, thank you for your time, mate. Take care, and we'll speak again soon.
Cheers.
Cheers, buddy.